Well, hello. We have a full moon at 7 Pisces coming up at the end of the month. This is actually a blue moon, and all that really means is that it's the second full moon in a calendar month. But I am recording this on August the 14th, and this is the day after the new Venus star point. And we have a new moon that you will have had the podcast for on August the 16th. And we're having a new moon and a new Venus. And then before the full moon on August the 30th, Uranus stations retrograde, Mercury stations retrograde, and we'll show you on the chart where the changes are. But before I show you all that, I'm going to pull a card and I'm just going to show you another t-shirt. I've bought these t-shirts for the honor of Venus retrograde, and it's Medusa. Do you see it? And it says, petrify the patriarchy. Anyway, they're from Spark Company in the UK, and I get no money from mentioning them. I just like their t-shirts. So, all right. So here we go. Let's pull you a card for the full moon. We've actually got the Five of Wands. And I'm just going to get the book by Angelis Arian and I'll show you the book. This is the Toth card. And I do think there's going to be a little bit of discomfort and strife as we move into this full moon. Unsurprisingly, though, because, we've got a lot of major changes coming. We are in a real time of revolutionary change. The Venus star point, which is the Sun-Venus Cazimi, was square to Uranus and trine to Chiron, and Uranus is stationing retrograde. And so there are when I say strife, I don't necessarily mean people fighting, but this means inner strife more, anxiety, frustration. This can be caused by holding back. It's the experience of having abundant fire energy, okay, because this is wands, this is fire, and not really knowing what to do with the energy. So this is not kind of saying that you're going to be fighting everywhere. This is more inner, kind of like, oh, I've got all these things I want to do. Venus is about to station direct, but Uranus is just stationed retrograde. Mercury's retrograde, and we've got this full moon, which is conjunct Saturn. So I'm going to look at all of this, but it does kind of feel like the closer you get to the full moon at the end of the month, the more kind of anxious things will get. It's in a mutable sign, which is kind of very changeable. A full moon in Pisces means it's opposite the sun in Virgo, which can often be a worrying, anxious kind of energy itself. So let's have a look at the chart quickly and then talk about the whole thing. I don't think this is going to be as long as some of the podcasts because there's not a huge amount of aspects to it. But you can see here is the moon. The moon is in Pisces. It's at 7 degrees Pisces in a 7-year. So we're still in this 7-year, right? And I'll talk about what that means. The moon is conjunct Saturn. However, Saturn is retrograde, so they're not moving towards each other, except that the moon will be conjunct Saturn not long before the full moon. So it is a very Saturnian full moon, which can be a little bit held back. Again, I'll talk more about all of that. And so that means the sun is over here in the sign of Virgo, which is service, the priestess, having meaning in life, but it's also the sign of the critic and can be very picky and detail oriented. And so having Saturn come against that as well can also bring up a few blocks and limiting beliefs. The primary aspect to the actual full moon is a trine, or rather a sextile from the moon to Pholus, Centaur Pholus in Capricorn. And that is the Pandora's box centaur. You know, it's the domino effect, taking the lid off and everything kind of, the cards fall after that, or the dominoes fall one by one. One other thing I have noticed, and I am going to call it a yod, is that Juno is very close to Venus, so is kind of pulled that way because they're applying to each other, is in a sextile to asteroid Lilith, and they are pointing right at Saturn. So that's a finger of fate and a finger of God, with the sun in the middle. So there's a little bit of pressure on this moon. It's being held back. It's got asteroid Lilith, the talk to the hand asteroid, saying, you know, I've had enough. No, not doing this anymore. And we've got Juno saying, hey, are you ready to really activate the lessons of the Venus retrograde, because she's conjunct Venus as Venus stations direct on September the 3rd, just 4 days later. Also, I mentioned Mercury is retrograde. He turned retrograde on the 23rd, so he's been retrograde for a week. But, you know, it's we've got a lot of Virgo energy in this. So this is Black Moon Lilith. This is asteroid Urania. They are both with fixed star Regulus. So there's a lot of kind of rebellious, ready for this radical change kind of energy. And as I mentioned, Uranus just stationed retrograde. Uranus is still at the exact minute that he's stationed retrograde at on August the 28th, just 2 days before. So I'll talk about all of that. But one other point I do want to mention that I will talk about is Neptune is in an ongoing square to the galactic center. And this is Circe, the sorceress, who has been hovering around the galactic center for quite some time. And they're in an ongoing square. And this is a Thor's hammer pointing at Venus on the full moon, just before Venus stations direct. And Thor's hammers cause reverberations too. If you remember, he in the movies, Thor kind of just throws it down, and it's like bit like Oppenheimer's bomb going off, right? And but the hammer always came back to him as well. But there's a lot, according to Anne Ortley, Thor's hammer configurations do a lot of smiting. So we'll look at that as well. So first of all, though, let me have a little look at 7, or a deeper look. So I'm going to put this in the show notes. I hope I remember, because somebody asked me to. But the site I usually look at for numbers, because I am not a numerologist, though I'm starting to get to know them from repetition, is numerology dash the numbers and their meanings .blogspot.com. But honestly, I usually find it by going, say, like this one's 7 numerology blogspot, and you can find it. But anyway, 7, we're in a 7 year. So 7 is really is related to the planet Saturn, by the way. It's in the it's the Chariot card, which is momentum, but it's also that state of getting into this inner preparedness before the momentum. Okay. Now, 7 really is about the collective consciousness, faith, and spirituality. It is a very Piscean number in that way. And it's a number of spiritual awakening and awareness, or enlightenment and development, whatever you want to call it. It's also the number of mysticism, intuition, and inner knowing. But it in other aspects as well, it also relates to the attributes of mental analysis, philosophy, and technicality, scientific research, discernment, all that kind of thing. Negative expressions of the 7, though, it can be a little bit tower cardy. It can be a bit gloomy, morbid, depressive, and also the 7 does have a little bit of a tendency to be a bit tower cardish. In other words, things have to collapse before they can be rebuilt. And that kind of feels very Pisces too. It's kind of like surrender, let go with the moon in Pisces before putting everything back together in a useful way in Virgo. So, you know, we've seen this happening over the year. But I think the biggest thing for me with this 7 is that, yes, it's really about this kind of awakening and growth, spiritual development and manifestation and things. But it's also got this weight kind of energy. It's also almost like, yeah, you know, it's coming. And I don't know about you, but, you know, as a 7 year, it feels like things are taking an awful long time, a lot of things anyway. So that's the energy of the 7 for me. It feels like, you know, we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. I always think of the chariot in the Thoth, if I could find the card, is very much this kind of preparation kind of energy. And it's usually kind of meant to be momentum, and it does mean momentum. You've got the momentum, but it's really also like you're not quite flying ahead yet like you might want to. So, you know, that's the feeling of all of this all together. And of course, an earth and water full moon is going to be a bit more muddy if you mix water and earth, they make mud. So yeah, I found the page. I want to read you the quote for the chariot from the Thoth Tarot, even though that wasn't the card I pulled. So motion or change and identity or rest are the first and second secrets of nature. Motion and rest, the whole code of her laws may be written on the thumbnail. And that was Emerson. So this card, according to Angeles Arian, represents the universal principle of change and causation. Taoist philosophy states that change is successful when both the great rooted tree by the flowing river are combined within a natural setting. So it's the tree and the river, all right? So it's gaining that solidity and then movement. So it's the principle of change, movement, and a combination of stillness and activity. All right, so it can be a little bit frustrating. So it goes back to that kind of frustrating energy that I talked about. All right, so you may be feeling like you've got to have this patience. This is what this is overall telling me. It's you know, we know it's time. Saturn conjunct the moon and the fact that the moon conjuncts retrograde Saturn being retrograde as well, kind of says a bit more stillness to me than movement. And then and the planetary changes of direction. The fact Uranus has only just stationed direct 2 days before the full moon, and the fact that Venus is stationing direct just 4 days after the new moon. So those two are really at their still points. Venus is not quite at the minute that she's going to station direct, but, you know, it's getting close. So it's a bit of a frustrating full moon. And Saturn rules Pholus, that's sign in Capricorn. It's like we keep new things, dominoes keep falling, new things keep coming out. It's like out of the box, Pandora's box, the lid's open and they keep coming out. So it's kind of like we've got forward momentum, but then more information comes in that we have to absorb first of all about where we're going and the changes in the structures that are coming from this full moon. So yeah, you know, that's the overall message of this full moon, really, just the full moon with Pholus. But then I mentioned that it's also kind of in a boomerang yod, and we've had a few of those lately. When Venus stationed retrograde, there were 2 boomerang yods. And a boomerang yod is a finger of fate or God formed by sextile between 2 planets and quincunxes pointing at another planet. And as I mentioned, there's a sextile between asteroid Lilith in Libra kind of saying, I've had enough. I'm going to put up boundaries. I've had enough about being over giving or keeping peace for the sake of it. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing peace for peace sake anymore. And then we've got Juno in Leo, who's saying it's time to be the flower of your heart. All right. And really kind of stand up for yourself. But here we have under Boomerang, the sun in Virgo. It has to have meaning. Whatever you're going on this full moon has to have deep meaning and to be useful. You know, we've been having this big rise of, for the want of a better term, divine feminine energy lately. I really do believe that this retrograde in Venus retrograde in Leo was about the rise of the solar feminine to be equal with the solar masculine, and the square to Uranus, remember, has just stationed retrograde, is asking for radical change. And the fact that the galactic center and Neptune in Pisces are smiting Venus as Venus stations direct on this full moon. So she's at a standstill pretty much. And there's this Thor's hammer pointing at her, is kind of saying, have you learned the lesson that the universe is telling you? The galactic center, it does emit new information, and Neptune in Pisces is really about the connection with the collective unconscious, which is also the 7, and with source and spirit. So there's just so much going on there about that connection with source and spirit and your heart and tuning in. Okay. Oh, it's kind of crazy, but we might feel like some things are being a little bit crushed. Okay, we can be feeling a little bit willful as well. Venus, Venus retrograde has been wonderful. It's really ignited the divine feminine, but it's also ignited our inner child, which is great, a really kind of wonderful one. But Leo can also be a little bit willful, a little bit teenagerish, and there's a few things like that. It's like almost like the divine feminine is rising up, but is in a very young way, if you like, and can be a little bit rebellious, a little bit stressful, and your inner child might be going, but what about me, kind of thing, on this full moon, because you're ready to kind of launch and leap out the gate and things after all this period of retrogrades. But things are going to start moving forward later, so don't worry about that. But we also have a mystic rectangle in this chart, and the mystic rectangle is from Circe in the galactic center to Eris in the North Node, the Shitster at Eris and the North Node in Aries. So they're in a trine. And then Vesta in Gemini, so that's the inner flame in the sign of Gemini, and the South Node and Ceres in Libra. And a mystic rectangle is a much kind of gentler kind of configuration, and I love the word, the term mystic rectangle. And they are harmonious, but there are two oppositions too. And this can make us attracted to really important causes. It was also termed the righteousness rectangle, apparently. Also, there's also, they've got various names, these things, but a mystic rectangle really brings a lot together, and kind of, you've got the oppositions kind of facing off with each other, but the trines and the sextiles kind of make them work together. It's a really strong sense of balance, and it really kind of brings everything together to work together. Okay, so you're able to pull to look at the aspects. You're able to pull kind of the voice of the universe, if you like, coming from the galactic center through the sorceress Circe as well, into the South Node with Ceres, saying nurture and nourish balance and harmony in Libra. And then also Vesta to your inner flame and how you think about things and how you're talking and speaking. And then to the North Node in Aries, you're able to shape things up through it. So that brings in a bit more of that righteousness, I think. There's a bit of, in this chart overall, there's a bit of, this radical change is coming. I know things have to change. It can be in your own life or collectively as well. We know we have to change because of things like the climate, and there's a lot of things wrong in the world. In this chart, there's an awful lot that's really kind of saying it's time to really start taking meaningful action, but you also need to do it patiently. You also need to do it through that stillness and activity that I talked about with the Chariot card, which is the number 7 card in the thing, because things are changing rapidly, but it's a spiritual upgrade. There's so much of this chart. The fact it's in Pisces, the moon is very mystical and spiritual as well, if you like, and Neptune in Pisces is involved, the galactic centers involved. But we do need a bit of that rebel spirit as well. We can't just sit there on cross-legged going and expect everything to change. There's got to be a mix of stillness and activity. That's really mainly what this chart is telling us. And I don't really have a lot else to say about this chart. Do I? No. It's a pretty straightforward full moon. I'll be talking in much more detail, of course, in my Venus class about some of the Venus aspects. And I would invite you to follow my Substack blog. I should put the link for that in the show notes, actually, where I send out daily posts with the more detailed aspects. And I try to kind of look at the flow of the aspects and the cycles so you can see how we are evolving over time. But I do want to look at the symbols for this. So before I look at the symbols, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Give me a thumbs up. Kind of let me, know what you think. Leave me comments. I usually respond to all comments at this point anyway, because I don't have as many followers as some of my friends. But I am going to read the Chandra symbol first, and I'm actually going to reword it a little bit because I don't like using one of the words in the symbol. So I'm going to say just a peasant woman or a traveler peasant woman sings a mournful chant. And John Sandbach, who actually channeled the Chandra symbols, says about this. Elias Lonsdale did an interpretation as well, and sometimes I read his, but this is from John Sandbach's blog. He says, to give voice to all the sorrow and suffering of our soul is to begin the process of releasing it. This degree feels that there is energy trapped in the self which needs to come out, energy of a toxic sort which can be alleviated through expressing it. It is because we do not deeply and completely embrace our pain that it stays with us. On the other hand, if we embrace it without letting go of it, we'll continue to retain it. The magic is in the full embrace, the full realization of the nature of our feeling that finally allows us to accept it and relax out of it. And as we allow ourselves to empathize with others expressing their pain, ours can be released simultaneously with theirs, knowing that others deeply and intuitively understand what we are feeling is a way of healing unto itself. So, yeah, it's, you know, Pisces is about surrender and release as well. And Virgo can be about healing. So I think the message I was getting from the chart on the full moon, with that sense of anxiety and everything, is that holding in. So I think definitely there is kind of this need to chant, to keen, to empathize, to come together as a collective, which is also very Pisces, to really come into community, to release this trapped energy in the self. Now let's read the Sabian symbol. And for this, I'm liking jamesburgess.com for the Sabian symbols, right, by the way. So the Sabian symbol is girl blowing a bugle. He says rebelliousness as a sign of coming change. Times are changing fast, and those of us who can see this are able to announce it to those who cannot. Despite appearances, the rebel often serves the needs of the community far more than the sheep. Groups are inclined to degenerate quickly from their first position of being a springboard or vehicle for new initiatives, and they are subject to entropy and sclerosis without the vibrant, innovative input that the rebel can offer. Always there is something new on its way. Always a group must adapt to that. And always there is the first intuitive people to sense the coming changes. They blow their bugles, even though few will want to listen into the herald sound of the future. I actually feel a bit like the girl blowing the bugle sometimes, because sometimes the world seems to go to pot. But when I look at the astrology and feel into everything intuitively, I do feel that we are going to be okay, that we are going to get through this. That doesn't mean we don't take action, right? Okay, like in the Chariot, we have to have the momentum. But, you know, there is some internal strife along the way. You know, it's not always easy kind of being the girl blowing the bugle, whether you are as well. And I'm sure if you're listening to this, that you're quite in tune with these energies. But this is an interesting full moon, you know, and I look at that Thor's hammer as well, pointing right at Venus. It's kind of saying, you know, the divine feminine, for again, want of a better expression, needs to lead the way, and not women necessarily. This is saying it's coming through the divine feminine. It's the voice of the goddess, whatever you want to call it. The more kind of empathic, caring, loving yin, night kind of energy, embracing that kind of twilight dark energy instead of fearing it, and instead of feeling like we have to be all go, 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 action, action, action all the time. So it's an interesting and a seemingly simple full moon, but also seemingly quite complex in the end once I've really gone into it and analysed. I think that mystic rectangle's really, really interesting. And Eris being on the North Node from the mystic rectangle. And incidentally, those two, Eris and the North Node, are also at a 7 because it's at 25 degrees, which is 2 plus 5. And Eris fights for the outsider. She shakes things up. She's showing us what really needs to change. And we do need to change. And this full moon is kind of saying, I know we need to change. I know we need to change. But I also need to do the rest, and the care, the self-care and the empathy and the healing as well. So I need to mix that up. I need to be the change and be the change within, really. That seems to work. All right, then, everybody, have a happy full moon whenever you watch this. And I hope you'll check the links below in the show notes. I'm going to actually add some of these sites I use in the show notes so people can find them, though I usually always say where they're from, so you can always Google. You know, not always let me Google that for you, but Also, don't forget I mentioned my Substack blog. My Substack blog's doing really well. I've got lots of subscribers on that already, and it's free unless you feel like supporting me. So you get there's an app, or you can get emails daily with my blog post and my thoughts on the transits each day. So I hope you'll subscribe to that as well and give me a thumbs up here. So for now, be enchanted and much love to you.